Milton is now a hurricane. We said earlier this morning that it was possible that could happen today. Some said it might happen tomorrow, and it's already happened. And so it's strengthened. Hasn't moved that far since the morning. It's going to start picking up the pace there as it comes closer to Florida before it makes landfall, likely sometime on Wednesday afternoon. The forecast currently calls for the storm to reach potentially a Category 4.
You know, they were talking about climate change yesterday, and now we're learning that scientists and researchers are looking at how to change the weather on purpose. That's right. Lasers now could one day manipulate rain and lightning. CBS This Morning contributor Michio Kaku is a physics professor at City College of New York. Professor, nice to see you. Extraordinary seeing Al Gore and Bill Clinton there together with Charlie, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, they did not get into this discussion, though. But it is fascinating. I mean, lasers, really, to change the weather?
That's right. Well, as Mark Twain once famously said, everyone complains about the weather, but no one ever does anything about it. Well, instead of doing a rain dance, we physicists are firing trillion-watt lasers into the sky to actually precipitate rain clouds and actually bring down lightning bolts. This is potentially a game changer.
But this is experimental.
It's experimental. However, in the laboratory so far it works. When you have water vapor and you have dust particles or ice crystals, you can precipitate rain. It condenses around the seeds. These seeds can also be created by laser beams. By firing trillion-watt lasers, you rip apart the electrons, creating what are called ions, and these ions act like seeds, like dust particles, bringing down rain and even lightning.
Go ahead.
Well, this fascinates me in part because, too, I remember reading the stories that China had used this during the Olympics, that the USSR had used this after Chernobyl to create rain clouds. I mean, did those really work then? We have some of these capabilities now?
Inconclusive. Even in the 60s, the CIA used this to bring down monsoons. Governments have been playing with this thing.
Alleged to.
Alleged to, right.
Yeah.
Now, we realize that for decades now, these governments have been alleged to have experimented with weather control, but nothing conclusive. This time we're bringing in the laws of physics rather than simply waving our hands and uttering mumbo jumbo. We're actually using trillion-watt lasers now. And in the laboratory, sure enough, they precipitate rain out of water vapor. Sure enough, you can actually bring down electricity down the beam.
Another example is the array of technologies, often referred to collectively as geoengineering, that potentially could help reverse the warming effects of global climate change. One that has gained my personal attention is stratospheric aerosol injection, or SAI, a method of seeding the stratosphere with particles that can help reflect the sun's heat in much the same way that volcanic eruptions do. An SAI program could limit global temperature increases, reducing some risks associated with higher temperatures and providing the world economy additional time to transition from fossil fuels. This process is also relatively inexpensive. The National Research Council estimates that a fully deployed SAI program would cost about $10 billion yearly. As promising as it may be, moving forward on SAI would also raise a number of challenges for our government and for the international community. On the technical side, greenhouse gas emission reductions would still have to accompany SAI to address other climate change effects, such as ocean acidification, because SAI alone would not remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. On the geopolitical side, the technology's potential to alter weather patterns and benefit certain regions.
And is it mainly, I mean, the frightening thing about this, and I know that there's been many, many tests now that are showing accumulations of aluminum, even in places in very, very remote parts of the earth, in the soils. And it's hard to explain why that would happen. And people should know this, that aluminum was never a free molecule prior to the era. Aluminum, all the aluminum on Earth is bound into silicate. And so it wasn't like there are many, many other metals like iron, et cetera, that are in the seawater and that, and zinc and magnesium, et cetera, that are free and biologically available. But aluminum was really not biologically available prior to and particularly the airline industry. when aluminum smelting became very, very widespread. And then, of course, the aluminum got into our cookware, it got into aluminum cans, it got into food storage, etc. And we now know that aluminum gets stored in the brain. It crosses the blood-brain barrier. It has a high association with Alzheimer's and with many, many other brain injuries and other injuries. And so it's kind of frightening to think that somebody may be putting large amounts of bioavailable aluminum into the environment, spraying it in microscopic particulates from airplanes.
You're completely correct on every point. Thank you for bringing that point up, that aluminum does not exist naturally in the environment in free form, always bonded to other elements. And we now have lab tests from around the world, all of which contain some level of aluminum. That's what brought me into this fight. When I began to lose massive amounts of my solar power uptake, I spent my whole life trying to get out of the smoggy Southern California, moved to the Pacific Northwest, built this off-grid home, and was losing huge amounts of my solar power uptake from whatever these aircraft were emitting, which I knew could not be condensation, not to block 70 or 80% of my solar PV uptake on some days. And that doesn't mean there's an 80% reduction in overall light. It just means you have to have direct sunlight for solar panels to function. I began to test my precipitation, did not want to find that primary element of aluminum, but I did. I continued to test my precipitation. In the course of 18 months, the amount of aluminum in a single precipitation event went from 7 ppb, parts per billion, to 3,450 ppb in a single rain event. That's highly toxic rain. So much aluminum is falling in our region of Northern California. It has altered soil pH values from 10 to 12 times toward alkaline. Rain pH should be about 5.6 based on atmospheric carbon loading. We're seeing now 6.6, 6.8 in some cases. We're testing individual precipitation events, the precipitation that is very high in aluminum. It's actually pushing the pH value toward neutral. And in regard to where else that might be coming from, because that's a question people ask. Maybe there's some industry across the street from me or so forth. We know from CARB, California Air Resources Board, that when they're testing from the aerosols from China, Japan, Asia, there's nothing between us and them. And CARB studies do not show aluminum migrating across the ocean. Mercury can, of course, because it converts to a gaseous state, but not aluminum. So where is that much metal coming from? And a final note, your viewers, your followers, can watch the world's most recognized geoengineer, Dr. David Keith, who works for Mr. Gates, works with Mr. Gates, works for Harvard as well.
It's about the fact, an uncomfortable fact, but it is a fact, that we have the technical ability to do this. They are all fast-acting, they are cheap, and they are fundamentally imperfect. There are problems of how you control something where an individual country can have tremendous leverage over the whole planet's climate, and where there are winners and losers in ways that really could be unpredictable. And I mean, not to frighten you, but I think you can imagine scenarios that lead to that.
Bill Gates is now backing something called sun-dimming technology that would reflect sunlight out of the Earth's atmosphere, causing global cooling. Ooh, that's not fraught with risks. You thought gain-of-function research on pathogens was dangerous. Try that. But that doesn't stop Harvard University. Its scientists are testing that technology by spewing calcium carbonate dust into the atmosphere.
Well, the World Economic Forum's looking into it. We've got a tweet from the Daily Wire. Should be no risk. World Economic Forum pushes space bubbles to block out the sun and stop climate change.
So just to give you the range, it's now 600 highly educated people located around the world.
This can be profoundly overwhelming, this subject, but if you break it down to what you can do on every single day, any given day, pass on credible data from a credible source, that's how you wake people up. Running out in the street and ranting and pointing at the jet spraying, again, it's not condensation. This is a sprayed particulate dispersion. And on that note, by the way, all military tankers, all U.S. commercial carriers have high bypass turbofan jet engines. That's a jet-powered fan, which is nearly incapable of producing any condensation trail except under rare circumstances. So we're seeing sprayed particulate dispersions. The way you wake people up, pass on credible data. We offer printed materials at geoengineeringwatch.org for at or below our cost. Very effective at waking people up. A picture's worth 1,000 words, or you can share the links for free from our site. But pass on credible data, plant the seed, move on, allow it time to sprout, because this is a very overwhelming subject. But if we keep doing that and we reach a critical mass of awareness, we'll cause a shockwave around the world. People participating will know what they're participating in, specifically our military brothers and sisters that are being told they're doing something benevolent when it's anything but. We have to reach a critical mass of awareness. All of us needed to do that.
What you're about to hear is perhaps one of the most vital information out there to this day, at least in my opinion, on geoengineering, coming from the man who is actually participating in this geoengineering program. Take a listen.
You could actually spray sulfuric acid in the stratosphere 20 kilometers over our head and use that to stop the planet warming up in a ugly tech fix.
You can spray something into the atmosphere to change.
Spray pollution into the atmosphere to stop it warming.
How do you do this?
You start with a fleet of modified business jets and say 20,000 tons of sulfuric acid into the stratosphere every year, and each year you have to put a little more. And this doesn't, in the long run, mean that you can forget about cutting emissions. We will need to rein in.
No, we'll get to it eventually. In the meantime, we're shrouding the earth in sulfuric acid.
So people are terrified about talking about this because they're scared that it will prevent us cutting emissions.
Right, and also that it's sulfuric acid.
We put 50 million tons of sulfuric acid in the air now as pollution, and 1 million people a year worldwide.
Okay, but it'll be better if we put more in.
We're talking about 1% of that.
1% more, we're just 10,000 more people.
You can do math.
What happens to the sulfuric acid after it's sprayed? Does it just stay up there?
No, it rains down, but it's a tiny addition to what we're already doing.
Is there any possible way this could come back to bite us in the end?
It actually turns out to be an old idea. This was known since President Johnson.
You ever look at those planes up there? They have contrails behind them. Maybe all those planes with the contrails, maybe they're actually spraying chemicals into the atmosphere right now and Uncle Sam isn't telling us.
Seems extremely unlikely.
That the United States is not telling something to its citizens? That seems extremely likely to me. Read the newspaper. I think they might have your idea already.